Welcome to today's segment of Moments Off the Mat. I'm Cody Bickley, USA Wrestling National Team High Performance Manager. I'm joined today, our special guest, Mr. Anthony Holman, who works with the NCAA. Anthony's official title is Manning Director of Championships and Alliances. Anthony, thanks for jumping on the call with us today.
My pleasure, Cody. Thanks for having me.
So, Anthony, you wear several hats within your job. You have a great sports administration background. Before we get into kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis, I also want to let our viewers know that Anthony currently sits in a position on the USA Wrestling Board of Directors, and we just got done with our annual Zoom convention, our first one. So we'll let Anthony talk about that here a little bit later on. But Anthony, just let our viewers know a little bit about you, where, the background that you come from. Like I said, you've been involved with some very high profile organizations, the Sacramento Kings. You've been involved at the high school level, obviously now at the NCAA level. You've been involved in the Quad Cities within the city, working in that capacity. So a lot of great quality professional background. So just give us a little bit of rundown, maybe even going back to college for you and what that looked like, and then running up through your professional career a little bit to this point.
Oh boy, that'll bore folks to sleep there.
No.
Cody, but yes, I've been fortunate to have some good experiences, work across the board at both professional sports, amateur athletics, international sports, intercollegiate, interscholastic. What that just tells you is I'm old. I'm just getting old, moving across. But yeah, I started in professional sport, working for a hockey team, believe it or not, in the Quad Cities, and got a chance to bring a new franchise there and work in marketing and branding, merchandise, and ticket sales, and that was really kind of my first entree into sports, if you will, and it was a great experience. I had never even been to a hockey game before, and I started working for a hockey team, but it certainly gave me quite a bit of experience. And from there, worked for several other pro teams for a while, and then I spent 9 years at the Illinois High School Association, where I got to my first real introduction into wrestling. Quite honestly, I was coordinating some of our media efforts and promotion things around our wrestling championships, and we're pretty proud of the wrestling high school and amateur wrestling we have in Illinois. So that was kind of my first introduction to it. Spent about 9 years at the association, the high school association, then went back into pro sports, worked in the NBA for a couple years, and then came to the NCAA. So right now, in my role at the national office, along with overseeing our wrestling championships, I oversee our officiating department for all of our sports and our playing rules for all of our sports. And I also lead a team that manages about 16 of our other national championships, including College World Series, FCS football, D2 baseball, a handful of others that our team does a really good job with. And then I work closely with what we call our business strategies team, which kind of helps to outline kind of our long range planning around the things we want to do to leverage, enhance, and provide value to our championship. So that's kind of my background and what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
That's great, Anthony. So I want to go ahead and jump into obviously the wrestling portion a little bit, if you will, and back it up a little bit to March. And as you just told us, and obviously a big part of your responsibility are the NCAA championships in various sports. Lots started to happen in March, as we all know. Things essentially started to drop, the ball dropped, so to speak, and so can you talk a little bit about how within the NCAA structure, Anthony, how that works on making decisions like that? I mean, I see the back, the viewers can see your background there. We were set to see what we all know is a historic event, first of its kind, what was going to happen there in essentially a indoor football stadium. how many tickets can we sell type deal, and just thinking outside of the box. You talk about a big part of that and the long-range planning and what you guys try to enhance championships. There's no question that was part of the reason to do this. But back us up a little bit, getting to that point. Unfortunately, on what had to be canceled and how that came about within your structure, how it works. And then let's go ahead and move that into 2021, kind of what's since this been going on, what's hopefully a little bit of the process and planning that you've been involved with, to obviously as we look towards March in 2021. So let's that March 2020 and then get into the 2021 aspect a little bit.
Yeah. So, man, I'm glad you got my background there, and hopefully folks can see that, because that was certainly a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into that. Not just mine, quite a few folks who were instrumental in kind of helping that vision come to fruition. But it was, March 9th, the Division I Wrestling Committee was in Indianapolis, and we were starting our selection process, the process by which we select the 330 wrestlers that have the honor of competing in our national championships, and seeding them and working through that. I had gotten wind through our leadership staff at the national office probably a month or so previously about this coronavirus thing that was going on, and we're tracking on that certainly, but it was similar to I've equated it to other folks that have asked me about it. A decade ago or somewhere around there, we had the H1N1 virus, and I was involved with our swimming and diving championship, and we had a bit of an outbreak there, and we were treating, at least in our preparations, similar to how we were treating our preparations around H1N1, around containment and continuation, which is a little bit different than obviously what we've seen with the coronavirus and COVID-19. But that's at that time, that was the closest thing that we knew or we had. So that was our preparation point around that. So fast forward, the committee's in and we're working through selections, and I'm being pulled in and out to take part in some of our senior leadership meeting discussions as this thing continues to evolve, and we're getting information from our medical professionals, and our board of governors is starting to be engaged and receiving that same information. The first thing we started to talk about was, okay, how can we do this with fewer fans? So my team, we started, as well as working on selections, we started modeling out what that would look like. How many people or family members or guests per attendee could we allow? How do we get them in? How did we get them out? Those types of things. So we started talking about that. Well, 24 hours later, it was no fans. And how do we manage just, additional cleaning? How do we keep the participants safe in a wrestling contact sport? We started modeling that out. And then 12 hours later, it was, you get another update from the medical professionals, and it's looking pretty dire. So the decision was made at that point to, we just, even though you got these other models, these additional precautions that you're talking about, the risk of kind of a huge outbreak, if you will, is just too high for us to take a chance at doing that at wrestling or any of our other championships. So the decision was made at that time to shut down all of our winter championships, which some had started. Our D2 and D3 wrestling championships were on site at their locations and had at least some start to check in and things like that. But we shut all those down, and track and field, we had folks on site, and swimming and diving for Division II were on site, but we just pulled the plug on all those and started to try and get folks home safely. Fast forward, 12, 24 hours from there, we started to just really try and how do you now close? Think about having 40 championships going on across the country. You got to get people home safely. You've got to work with those vendors, those facilities to kind of close out those events. So that probably was my life for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then we quickly shifted from there to, okay, let's start to develop plans about how we bring our championships back. And that's been a big part of my job, duties, responsibilities since that time. And we've got any number of iterations of models, if you will, about bracket sizes or cleaning protocols or ingress, egress for student athletes, participants, fans, how you're going to house them, how you're going to transport them, how you're going to conduct weigh-in. So that's really what has been centered, the focus here of in the last 4 to 6 months around what we're doing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, a lot of great information. So I want to talk a little bit about that last point that you were talking about there, Anthony. We've also seen the NCAA recently make some decisions for obviously safety reasons and just the world that we're living in. But we're starting to see some decisions being made about fall championships, getting postponed. I use the word postponed because I think there is some hope that some of those championships can hopefully occur in the spring. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was the directive. So our board of governors in our structure authorized the divisional groups in our legislative process to make their own determination with some parameters and some guidelines around whether to move forward with fall championships as scheduled, to cancel them altogether, or to delay them, if you will, or move them to a different part of the year. And that's both D2 and D3 governance structures decided, hey, based on the parameters that we have to follow and kind of the tea leaves as we see them and the resources that are available to those institutions on their campuses, they decided to cancel our D2 and D3 fall championships. Division One went forward a little further, and then the Division One board just over on Friday decided, hey, if we can do this safely with a few more parameters, let's plan to move the fall championships into the second semester. So that could be the end of winter going into the spring.
Right.
Those parameters include likely some reduction in bracket and field sizes, selection of predetermined sites so that the safety protocols, the PPEs, and the testing materials, and all of those types of things that are going to be essential to conduct effective and safe championships will be required. So we need to know where those sites are in advance to prepare them. So that's part of the requirement as well. So a few of those things have been put into place. At this time, right now, we haven't, there's been no modifications or changes directed or applied for winter championships, which includes wrestling. But it's certainly safe to assume that if we're still in a similar situation in terms of our country with this virus, that some modifications may be necessary for those winter championships as well.
Right. So Anthony, talking about that a little bit for our viewers, I mean, it probably sounds simple to say, hey, you know what? Let's just move everything to the spring. I'm sure, I don't want to, put words in your mouth, but that's a very complex puzzle to put together when you talk about moving a certain number of championships that were essentially going to be in the fall, and then maybe tack on, obviously, with what was already supposed to occur in the spring, now bring in more championships, potentially to the spring. Once again, in your seat, in your role, what are some of the major complexities or issues when you start moving that calendar back and stacking things on top of one another?
Yeah, it's like a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, right? So, and I tell folks, I'm a huge Excel spreadsheet guy. I love it. I get geeked out on those things, but I'm my head spinning around in circles trying to fit these pieces together. So you think about our fall, in terms of championships, is really the least of our 3 seasons, the fewest of sports. So some would say, hey, you can move, volleyball, field hockey, football, water polo. You can move those fairly easily, right? Not as easy as you would think, because the championship's only one component of that. You still have to have the season, and the season takes place on these campuses across the country. So if the field hockey and football and lacrosse teams all share facilities, and now you're going to move them all into the same season on these campuses, how does that work? Well, your athletic training staff moves from season to season with different teams. Well, if you don't have enough to support those, or somebody who works on football in the fall works on baseball in the spring or something else, if you overlay that, now what are you going to do with your athletic training staff and the resources that are necessary for those? So there's a lot of moving pieces, and not just for the championship, but for our member institutions to handle. From our viewpoint, we don't select these championship sites, overnight. These are done years in advance. So the scheduling of that is complex, because many of these venues have other tenants, other events that we have to deal with. Our broadcast partners, who provide a tremendous platform for us to show and celebrate these championships and the young people that are part of them. They have other conflicts with other entities in the spring and winter, NBA basketball, NHL hockey. So we're not only are some of those same arenas that we've got to try to work around, but our broadcast partners have to find windows and opportunities for our championships as well. So all of those things are part of the calculus that we have to try and navigate and find solutions to. And at the top of that is, the safety of our student athletes. When you think about the number, and I don't know if people realize this or recognize this, so I'm going to share. So the travel and per diems for student athletes that are traveling between or during our championships, that's coordinated and paid for by the NCAA. Much of that is commercial travel for individual sports. For some team sports, larger team sports like football or lacrosse or baseball or even basketball to a certain degree, are charter flights. So there's just a limited availability of those. And when you move additional teams, championships on top of spring, which is our most heavily populated season, it creates some travel challenges for us as well, especially in a climate where there's reduced opportunities for air travel, for buses and things like that. So that's more than probably what you wanted to know, Cody, but those are all of the pieces that we are trying to manage and do that in an effective, efficient, safe, and financially responsible way.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think a lot of fans, I would say, that's why I'm glad you spoke about that, would take that for granted. They just don't know all those complexities. You talked about, letting, let's talk about the TV viewership, the coverage. We've seen grown in the sport of wrestling exponentially last years, to where I can remember not long ago, you were hoping to get the finals, a spot late evening or something like that, and then maybe a rebroadcast a month later or something. Well, now, it's phenomenal coverage with ESPN, right? Like every round, and it's really grown. And for us, I would talk about it on our side, kind of the world that I live in talking to the Tokyo Olympic Games. Hey, BC is a pretty big partner in this. And, for them when we start talking about postponing the Olympic Games, things like that have to be talked about as well, because like you said, there are conflicts that could be stacked right on top of that. And you've got to work through that and see what really is going to work, so that you can give those viewers that hopefully that same experience a little bit through TV. So
absolutely.
Great point there. So Anthony, I'm going to have you switch hats a little bit and ask you to put on your USA Wrestling board member hat here for a few seconds. And I mean, like I said, you're heavily involved in the sport of wrestling now and oversight and doing things. But outside of this COVID-19 or, situation that we're all dealing with, what would you say is kind of the temperature of wrestling in our country right now? Are we on solid ground, or what do you see? I mean, like I said, a great picture there behind you, I think, forecasting a little bit, but as a whole, what do you think? How do we sit?
Yeah, I think wrestling is tremendously positioned, both here in the United States and across the country. Now, I had an opportunity to travel with a part of the U.S. delegation to Budapest here a couple years ago for the Worlds, and just the excitement around that, the interest level, and all of that when this community of wrestling kind of fortified and came together to safeguard the sport and to keep it in the Olympic Games. And I think that momentum has just has kept going, and it keeps feeding this interest. It's brought new other casual fans to the sport. I think it certainly has done that. I'm proud to say that our NCAA championships across all three divisions have elevated that exposure for the sport here. I think women's wrestling and the popularity of that and the growth of that has also has really helped. So I'm really proud to sit on the board at USA Wrestling, and think it's have had the pleasure of being on USA Swimming Board and have some touches with some other NGBs, but I'm really partial to the way that President Baumgartner and the work that Bruce and his team they do with this, and it's been really affirming for me to see this. I didn't grow up wrestling. I came from playing basketball and baseball, so this was a different breed to me. But the intensity and the passion that you see with coaches and the wrestlers that are involved, it's contagious. So right, so you can't help but see that. And Rich Bender, our executive director, told me that before we went to Budapest, and I saw Budapest, and I saw that firsthand. So your question was, where do I see this, or how is the health of wrestling? I think the health of wrestling is really good. And I think part of that is, the success that we've seen internationally for USA Wrestling, and kind of the increased interest that we've had around collegiate wrestling specifically, and the development of women in the sport as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think it's hard in this environment, Anthony. It's tough. It seems like, here recently, and you get that this has been, unfortunately, this epidemic has been going on, and we were really tracking, when you think about with what was going to be going on at the Division I championships, March 2020. It was just, I agree with you. It seemed like we were getting to all-time highs, and, sometimes you get, your feet kicked out from underneath you. And for a lot of our viewers, in the sport of wrestling, it may seem like that right now because there's not a lot going on, and it's tough. It's tough in the sports world right now. And being a leader, Anthony, as you are, like I said, we wake up and sometimes we hear that unfortunate institutions have to make tough decisions, and they've had to, let a few sports go. But I guess, once again, being a leader in the sport of wrestling, being around these championships, what would be, kind of a shining light, that some information or wisdom that you can give them as we move forward today, where we're at right now today? What would you tell those people?
Well, I'd still say to be encouraged. There are, again, I keep pointing to what we're seeing on the women's side and the number of programs that are being started and developed that would move the women into an emerging sport for the NCAA, to hopefully set up the groundwork for us to have a women's national championship at some point for the NCAA. The other part I would point to folks is that, just a few short years ago, wrestling a little bit internationally was on life support, and we were seeing, programs really declining. And I think we've as a community have done some things that really, again, has helped that. So I'm encouraged by that. One of the things that we talked about, and my background shows a little bit, but it wasn't an accident that we were going to be in Minneapolis at a football stadium in 2020, an Olympic year. It wasn't an accident that we moved or took the wrestling championship, the Division I wrestling championship, to New York and Madison Square Garden in 2016 in an Olympic year. So that's a part of this, in my mind, the community of wrestling, and the folks that the benefit of me working at the NCAA, sitting on the board for USA Wrestling, taking part in the National Wrestling Coaches Association conventions, having dialogue with the Wrestling Hall of Fame to think more globally and big picture, so that we as a sport community, and not as individual organizations, but as a unit, are looking to grow the sport, regardless of the style or the gender, but all of these things, and everybody appreciating that you doing this event there helps the greater good, or me being in this space helps the greater good. So I share all that to say that more of those types of collaborative approaches will continue, and I think that's certainly going to be a positive thing for our sport.
Yeah, great. Well, Anthony, we don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're a busy man and have some upcoming Zoom meetings, as we all do, it seems like, in today's world. But really thank you for joining us today, Anthony. Really appreciate your leadership in the sport of wrestling right now. We definitely need some great leaders in these challenging times, and you've set yourself apart. So thank you for all you do for wrestling, especially for USA Wrestling as well, Anthony.
Thank you, Cody. Appreciate you having me.
So, folks, thanks for joining us today. That concludes today's segment of Moments Off the Mat with Mr. Anthony Holman at the NCAA. We wish you a great day, and we'll see you back here soon.